He was forged in the ice-cold waters of Bud-S and tempered in the sun-scorched kill zones of a world that had forgotten peace. Yet he felt more adrift in the quiet mist of his father's hometown than he ever had on a blacked-out insertion. Silas came home not as a prodigal son, but as an executor, a title that felt hollow and cold. His only attachment was the silent, steady presence at his side, Cerberus, a Belgian Malinois whose loyalty was a law of nature, uncomplicated by the tangled legacies of blood and regret. The man had left Silas nothing but a name and a small, forgotten house clinging to a cliffside overlooking the Puget Sound. A sanctuary meant for a peace Silas could never seem to find. Now, that sanctuary had been violated. The front door was splintered, the lock shattered with brutal, artless force. Inside, the small house was a storm of overturned furniture and scattered papers, a desecration of memory. Silas moved through the wreckage with the terrifying fluid grace of a predator entering a disturbed den. His eyes, the color of a winter sky, missed nothing. The mud on the floor, too thick for the local soil, the faint chemical smell of cleaning solvent, a clumsy attempt to erase presence. Cerberus whined, a low thrum of agitation in his chest, his head low as he swept the rooms, a four-legged sensor array confirming what Silas already knew. This wasn't a simple burglary. It was a search, professional, but not military. Too messy, too loud. Silas knelt, his hand resting on Cerberus's powerful neck, the contact a silent promise, a guardian without a charge, a protector without a war. His father, a quiet man who studied geology and wrote letters Silas never answered, was an unlikely target for this kind of violence. It made no sense. He ran a gloved finger over a deep scratch in the hardwood floor, an indentation from something heavy being dragged. He followed the line to the study, where his father's old oak desk was splintered, its drawers ripped out and tossed aside. They were looking for something specific, something his father had, a legacy they were willing to kill for. The cold certainty of it settled in his gut, a familiar feeling he hadn't expected to find here, in this place of fog and ghosts. He thought he had left the war behind him, but the war had followed him home. They took something, or they didn't find it. Either way, they would be back. This quiet town was no longer a sanctuary. It was a hunting ground, and they had just kicked the hornet's nest. He looked at the loyal dog beside him, a living weapon of fur and fang, and a grim resolve hardened his features. They had come for a secret, but they had found a guardian instead. They thought they were dealing with a dead man's son. They were about to learn they were dealing with something else entirely. An attacker is ready to kill an officer and his K9 partner, but he has no idea a Navy SEAL is about to step in. Let us know in the comments where you are watching from. God bless you and your families. The local sheriff, a man named Henderson, whose gut strained the buttons of his uniform, surveyed the scene with a practiced weariness. He saw a B&E, a junkie looking for a quick score. He didn't see the tactical footprints in the soft earth outside the window or the subtle pressure marks on the doorframe that spoke of a hydraulic spreader, not a crowbar. He saw chaos. Silas saw intent. "Looks like some punks, son," Henderson said, his voice a gravelly rumble that grated on Silas's finely tuned senses. "Happens. They see an empty house, figure there's something to pawn." Silas didn't respond. He was watching the tree line, his focus absolute, his body a study in stillness. Cerberus sat at his heel, equally still, his gaze mirroring his master's. They were a single unit of coiled potential. A woman arrived, her car a practical Subaru that crunched on the gravel driveway. She moved with a purpose that immediately set her apart from the sheriff's slow deliberation. She had sharp, intelligent eyes and a no-nonsense set to her jaw. Dr. Aris Thorne, the town veterinarian, his father's emergency contact. "Silas?" she asked, her voice clear and direct. She took in the scene, her gaze lingering on the splintered door, then on Silas himself. There was no pity in her eyes, only a sharp, assessing intelligence. "I'm so sorry. Your father, he was a good man. Did he ever mention being in trouble, Doctor?" Silas's question was blunt, cutting through the expected condolences. Aris paused, her focus narrowing. He was worried. The last few weeks he was agitated. He kept talking about his legacy, about protecting the sound. He mentioned a name, Julian Croft. The name meant nothing to Silas, but the way she said it, with a mixture of contempt and fear, told him everything he needed to know. This was the foil, the antagonist. Sheriff Henderson sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Croft Development. Son, they're about to build a luxury resort over on Eagle Point, bringing jobs, money. Your dad was one of the few holdouts against it. A bit of an eccentric, you know. Chained himself to a bulldozer last month." Henderson saw a grumpy old man. Silas saw a protector, a guardian fighting a war on a different front. Aris shot the sheriff a look of pure venom. "He was protecting the watershed, Bill. Croft's environmental reports are a joke, and you know it." The tension was a living thing in the small, wrecked house. The lines were being drawn. Silas felt the fog of his leave burning away, replaced by the ice-cold focus of a mission. His father hadn't been a random victim. He was a casualty. This wasn't a break-in. It was an intelligence-gathering operation. They were looking for his father's ammunition against Croft. And now, they would be coming for him. The sanctuary was compromised. The legacy was at risk. His purpose, once lost in grief and distance, was becoming terrifyingly clear. He was no longer just the executor of a will. He was the guardian of a legacy. Silas dismissed the sheriff with a curt nod, his attention already elsewhere. Civilian law enforcement had its place, but this wasn't their arena. This was a shadow war, fought in whispers and violent searches, and he was its newest combatant. Once Henderson's cruiser disappeared down the winding coastal road, Silas turned to Aris. "Show me everything. His office, his research." She led him back to the ransacked study, her earlier composure showing cracks. "He spent years on this, Silas, mapping the hydrology of the entire peninsula. He said Croft's plans for the resort would poison the aquifer within a decade. He had proof." She pointed to the savaged oak desk. "He kept all his critical data on a separate drive, always. He was paranoid, or prescient." Silas ran his hands along the underside of the desk, then the back, his fingers searching for the slightest inconsistency in the wood. Nothing. He moved to the bookshelf, a massive floor-to-ceiling unit filled with geological texts and local histories. He tapped the wood panels, listening. He wasn't just looking. He was hunting. Cerberus whined softly, nosing at a section of the floorboards near the wall. Silas paused, watching the dog. Cerberus nudged a specific board with his snout again, then looked up at Silas, his intelligent eyes expectant. Silas knelt, prying at the edge of the board with his combat knife. It came up with a faint groan. Beneath it was a small, lead-lined cavity. Nestled inside was a single, ruggedized hard drive and a folded piece of paper. His father's handwriting was a familiar, spidery script. They only understand force. Protect our sanctuary. This is your legacy now. The words hit Silas harder than any bullet. A legacy he had never wanted, from a man he barely knew, was now his sole responsibility. He felt the weight of it, a physical pressure on his chest. He looked at Aris, whose eyes were wide with a mixture of awe and fear. "This is it," she whispered. "This is what they were looking for." As if summoned by her words, a sleek black sedan with tinted windows drove slowly past the house, its engine a low, predatory growl. It didn't stop, but the message was clear. "We are watching. We know you're here." Silas felt no fear, only a cold, concentrated rage. The kind of rage that fueled him through missions where survival was measured in seconds. They had violated his father's home. They had threatened his legacy. And now they were trying to intimidate him. He slipped the hard drive into his pocket. "Let's go," he said to Aris, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "Your clinic. It's more defensible." She didn't question him. She saw the shift in him, the transformation from grieving son to something else, something dangerous and focused. The operator had taken over. He was a weapon without a target, and Julian Croft had just painted a bullseye on his own back. The protector had found his purpose. The hunt was on. The call came over the local police scanner an hour later, a burst of panicked static that cut through the quiet hum of Aris's veterinary clinic. An officer down. Shots fired near the old cannery. Officer Miller. Aris's face went pale. "That's Dave," she said, her voice tight. "He has a canine partner, a German shepherd named Zeus." Silas was already moving. He had been studying a satellite map of the area on Aris's computer, cross-referencing it with his father's geological surveys. The old cannery was less than 2 miles away, situated in a tactical bottleneck with limited access roads. It was a perfect ambush site. A kill box. "Stay here. Lock the doors," he commanded, his tone leaving no room for argument. Cerberus was already at the door, whining, sensing the shift in energy. "No," Aris said, her jaw set. She grabbed a comprehensive trauma kit from a supply cabinet. "I'm a doctor. Dave is my friend, and I was a combat medic with the Rangers for 6 years before I decided I liked my patients better when they didn't talk back. I'm going." Silas looked at her for a long moment, seeing the steel in her eyes. He gave a single sharp nod. Respect. They moved out, Silas driving Aris's Subaru with a speed and precision that seemed impossible on the winding, mist-slicked roads. He killed the headlights a quarter-mile out, navigating by memory, and the faint moonlight filtering through the dense canopy of pines. They approached the cannery on foot, moving through the woods with Cerberus taking point, a silent shadow flitting between the ancient trees. The scene was illuminated by the erratic flashing lights of Officer Miller's patrol car, which had crashed nose first into a concrete barrier. The driver's side door was open, riddled with bullet holes. A man in tactical gear, black fatigues, plate carrier, but no insignia, was dragging an unconscious Officer Miller from the vehicle. Another man held a suppressed rifle, his attention focused on the officer's K9, Zeus, who stood his ground over his downed partner, barking ferociously, his teeth bared. Zeus was wounded, a dark patch of blood matting the fur on his shoulder, but he refused to yield. He was the very definition of a guardian. "Just put the dog down," the man dragging Miller grunted, his voice impatient. "Croft wants the car's GPS data erased, now." The rifleman raised his weapon, the suppressor aimed squarely at Zeus's head. He never fired the shot. A blur of black and tan erupted from the darkness beside him. Cerberus hit him at full speed, a 70-pound missile of focused fury. The impact was brutal, driving the man to the ground with a strangled cry. Jaws clamped down on the man's gun arm, and the sound of snapping bone echoed faintly in the night air. Silas emerged from the shadows behind the second man, a ghost in the swirling mist. He moved with an economy of motion that was terrifying to behold. There was no wasted energy. A fluid strike to the back of the knee buckled the man's leg. A second, precise blow to the temple with the butt of his pistol, and the man crumpled to the ground, unconscious before he even landed. It was over in less than 5 seconds. 2 hostiles neutralized. Silence descended, broken only by the pained whimpers of the wounded shepherd and the ragged breathing of the man whose arm Cerberus had shattered. Silas didn't return fire. He didn't engage. He ended the threat. He was a weapon, and his target was neutralized. Aris was already moving toward the officer, her medic training kicking in, her face a mask of intense concentration. Silas scanned the perimeter, his pistol held in a low, ready position, his eyes piercing the darkness. This was an escalation, a significant one. They weren't just searching for data anymore. They were eliminating witnesses. They had tried to kill a cop. They had tried to kill a dog. In Silas's world, there was no coming back from that. The air was thick with the coppery scent of blood and the sharp tang of cordite. Aris was a whirlwind of controlled motion, her hands moving with the practiced efficiency of a seasoned medic. He's got 2 in the vest. They didn't penetrate. 1 in the leg, through and through. Femoral artery is intact, thank God, she rattled off, applying a tourniquet high on Miller's thigh. He's lost a lot of blood, but he'll live. She shifted her attention to Zeus, who was whining softly, licking his partner's face. Let me see, boy. The shepherd, despite his own pain, allowed her to examine the gunshot wound on his shoulder. It's a clean entry and exit, but he's in shock. Silas stood guard, a silent sentinel watching the dark woods. Cerberus was at his side, a low growl still rumbling in his chest as he watched the 2 neutralized hostiles. Silas had already zip-tied their hands and feet, a grimly efficient process. He'd retrieved their weapons and comms, unmarked gear, encrypted radios, professional mercenaries. Croft wasn't using local thugs. He was using a private army. This was far bigger than a zoning dispute. They weren't trying to kill him, Silas said, his voice a low murmur. Not at first. They disabled the car, went for the GPS. Miller must have fought back. The dog too. They were tying up loose ends. Aris looked up, from dressing Zeus's wound, her eyes meeting Silas's over the flickering emergency lights. The GPS? Why? His father's house is on Miller's patrol route, Silas deduced. My guess, they put a tracker on his car when he was at the house earlier. They've been listening. They knew he was heading out here. They wanted to know where he was going, who he was talking to. They wanted to sanitize the intelligence field before making their next move. He knelt and picked up the suppressed rifle, a high-end European model, ridiculously expensive and difficult to acquire. Croft is spending a fortune to cover his tracks. He pulled the hard drive from his pocket, the small, dense object feeling impossibly heavy. Whatever is on this, it's worth killing cops for. The shared understanding passed between them without a word. They were in this together now. The lines of their separate lives, his as an operator on leave hers as a small-town vet, had been irrevocably blurred. They were a unit bound by a shared threat and a shared purpose. They were protectors of a legacy they were only just beginning to understand. Using one of the mercenaries' encrypted radios, Silas listened for a moment before switching it off. Chatter. A third man, likely an Overwatch, was reporting the ambush had gone silent. He was pulling back to a rally point. Good. Let them run. Let them report their failure to Croft. Let the arrogant corporate villain know that his carefully laid plans had just run into something he hadn't accounted for. A ghost, a guardian, a man with nothing left to lose and a promise to keep. The war for this small-town sanctuary had just officially begun. Back at the clinic, under the sterile glare of surgical lights, the truth finally spooled out. With Aris's help, Silas bypassed the drive's military-grade encryption. His father, it turned out, was more than just a geologist. He had been a high-level consultant for the EPA before he retired, a digital bloodhound who specialized in uncovering corporate malfeasance. The drive was his final, damning report. It was a masterpiece of digital forensics. Croft Development wasn't just planning to build a resort. They were planning to use the construction as a cover to illegally frack for rare earth minerals under the peninsula. The geological surveys, falsified environmental impact statements, and secret contracts were all there. The process would irreversibly poison the aquifer, the lifeblood of the entire region, just as his father had predicted. But it was worse than that. The drive also contained encrypted emails and bank records detailing payoffs to politicians and regulators. More damningly, it detailed a similar operation in South America that had ended in disaster. An entire village poisoned, the incident buried under a mountain of money and intimidation. Julian Croft wasn't just a greedy developer. He was a monster who valued profit over human life, a man who would burn the world for $1. His father's scrawled note suddenly made perfect, chilling sense. They only understand force. He hadn't been speaking metaphorically. My God, Aris breathed, her face illuminated by the screen's glow. He was going to blow the whistle. He was going to ruin Croft completely. Silas stared at a grainy satellite photo on the screen. It showed the South American village, now a ghost town surrounded by barren land. He saw the faces of the children he'd fought to protect in faraway lands, and a cold, precise fury settled deep in his soul. This was the same evil, just wearing a different mask, a $3,000 suit instead of a dusty Thorb. His father hadn't been a soldier, but he had died fighting the same war. He had died trying to protect his home, his sanctuary. This is his legacy, Silas said, the words feeling like stone in his mouth. He looked around the clinic, at the cages of sleeping animals, at the quiet hum of the machines that sustained life. This was Aris's sanctuary, the town, the sound, the clean water. That was everyone's sanctuary, and Julian Croft was going to burn it all down. A message pinged on his father's encrypted email account, which was still open. The sender was anonymous. The message was a single image. It was a live photo of Aris's clinic, taken from the woods across the road. A red laser dot was painted on the window right where Aris was sitting. The message below the image was simple. The drive or the doctor. You have 1 hour. The open loop was closing. The subtle threats were over. Croft was done playing games. He was moving his queen into check, forcing Silas's hand. He thought he was caging a wolf. He had no idea he had just cornered one. Silas's expression didn't change, but inside him a switch was flipped. The grieving son, the reluctant executor, they were gone. Only the operator remained, the protector. He looked at Aris, who was staring at the screen, her face a mixture of fear and defiance. "He's not getting it," she said, her voice shaking but firm. Silas simply nodded. He began to methodically shut down the computer, his movements economical and precise. "No," he agreed, his voice a low, chilling whisper. "He's not." Julian Croft sat in an opulent, glass-walled office overlooking the churning grey waters of the Sound. He was a man accustomed to control, a puppeteer who pulled the strings of politicians and markets with equal ease. He exuded an aura of expensive cologne and untouchable arrogance. The failure at the cannery was an annoyance, an unexpected variable, but not a catastrophe. The son, this Silas, was a ghost, a non-entity according to his background check. A SEAL, yes, but on leave, grieving, unfocused. Croft had dealt with harder men. He sipped a ridiculously expensive scotch, swirling the amber liquid in his glass as he spoke into his secure phone. "The variable is now a liability. I want him and the doctor neutralized. I want the drive, and I want it done quietly this time. Bring them to the estate. The south wing is soundproofed. I'll handle the interrogation myself." He believed in a hands-on approach when the stakes were this high. He saw the world as a series of assets and liabilities, and Silas had just moved column A to column B. He ended the call and looked out at the storm clouds gathering over the water, a smirk playing on his lips. He saw the raw, untamed beauty of the landscape not as a sanctuary, but as an untapped resource, a vault waiting to be cracked open. Silas's father had been a sentimental old fool, a guardian of dirt and trees. This son would be no different. A man of violence, perhaps, but a man nonetheless. And all men had a breaking point. Croft's estate was a fortress of modern architecture and cutting-edge security, a sanctuary of wealth and power nestled deep in a private forest. It was his kill box, a place where he was a god. He had cameras, sensors, and a team of highly paid mercenaries, ex-special forces from less discerning countries, who owed their loyalty to his bank account. Not a flag. He was ready. He was confident. He was the foil, the antagonist who always won because he wrote the checks and made the rules. He had no concept of a loyalty that couldn't be bought, of a duty that transcended money. He could not comprehend a man like Silas, for whom a promise to a dead father was more binding than any contract. While Croft planned his victory, Silas was preparing for war. He wasn't thinking about negotiation or escape. He was thinking about angles of attack, fields of fire, and the systematic dismantling of an enemy's fortress. He moved around Aris's clinic with a quiet, deadly purpose, gathering supplies, not weapons, but tools, gauze, alcohol, saline solution, sutures, the tools of a medic, the tools of a man planning for the aftermath of extreme violence. He worked in silence, Cerberus shadowing his every move, a silent partner in the grim task ahead. Aris watched him, her fear slowly being replaced by a cold resolve. She recognized the look in his eyes. It was the same look she had seen in the eyes of team leaders in the desolate mountains of Afghanistan just before a mission kicked off. It was the chilling certainty of a man who had accepted the cost of the coming fight and deemed it necessary. Croft had made a fatal error in calculation. He thought he was setting a trap. In reality, he had just issued a formal invitation for his own destruction. The world had shrunk to the space between one breath and the next. Silas moved through the rain-lashed forest surrounding Croft's estate like a wraith, the dense foliage and driving storm providing perfect cover. He wore dark, functional clothing, his face smeared with mud. He was a creature of the elements, indistinguishable from the night. At his side, Cerberus was a ripple of shadow, his paws making no sound on the sodden earth. They were a hunting party of two, a seamless unit of instinct and training. Silas carried a single pistol, his father's old hunting rifle slung over his back, and a combat knife. He was outmanned and outgunned, a fact that concerned him not at all. An operator doesn't fight fair. He fights smart. He creates his own advantages. He becomes the terrain. He becomes the fear in his enemy's heart. He bypassed the perimeter fence with a pair of insulated cutters, snipping the wires connected to the seismic sensors with a surgeon's precision. He navigated the laser grid by observing the patrol patterns of the guards, moving only in the blind spots, the brief windows of opportunity that lasted mere seconds. To the high-tech surveillance system, he was a ghost, a flicker of data too insignificant to register as a threat. Inside the security hub, a bored mercenary watched a bank of monitors, sipping a lukewarm energy drink. He saw nothing but rain and swaying trees. He didn't see the shadow detaching itself from the base of the main house. He didn't see the flicker of movement as a window on the ground floor was silently pried open. Silas was inside. The air in the house was sterile and cold, smelling of polished marble and Croft's arrogance. He moved through the cavernous, minimalist rooms, a primal force of lethality in a world of curated art and empty luxury. The juxtaposition was stark, the raw, determined protector against the sterile, soulless cage. He had given Cerberus a single, silent hand signal. Hunt. The dog disappeared into the labyrinthine corridors, his mission clear. Find Aris. Create a diversion. Sow chaos. Silas, meanwhile, moved toward the security hub. He was the weapon, and his target was the enemy's nervous system. He took down the first guard from behind, a swift, silent chokehold that rendered the man unconscious in seconds. He dragged the body into a closet and continued on. The second guard was in the hub, his back to the door. Silas entered so quietly that the man didn't even have time to register his presence before a hand clamped over his mouth and the cold steel of the knife pressed against his throat. The cameras. Loop them, Silas whispered, his voice a deadly rasp. One mistake, and you die. The guard, his eyes wide with terror, complied, his fingers trembling as he typed the commands. The monitors now showed a continuous, 5-minute loop of an empty, rain-swept estate. Silas was now truly a ghost in the machine. He disabled the internal alarms and unlocked the doors to the south wing. Then, with the same chilling efficiency, he neutralized the guard and laid him beside his companion. He was a weapon without a target no more. He had a target, and he was disassembling his world piece by piece. The sanctuary of wealth was about to become a kill box, but not for him. The arrogant villain, secure in his fortress, had no idea the Guardian was already inside the walls, and the legacy of a quiet geologist from a small coastal town was about to be honored in blood and fury. The first sign of chaos was a terrified scream echoing from the upper floor, followed by the sound of shattering glass. Cerberus had found the guards holding Aris. The diversion had begun. In the south wing, Julian Croft heard the commotion over his comms and scowled in annoyance. "What is going on up there? I ordered quiet." "Sir, it's the dog. The damn dog is—" The transmission ended in a wet, gurgling sound. A predatory silence followed. Croft felt the first, unfamiliar prickle of fear. This wasn't part of the plan. This wasn't controlled. He drew a sleek, silver-plated pistol from his desk drawer, the weapon more a symbol of his power than a tool he was skilled in using. He barked orders into his comms, directing his remaining men to converge on the second floor. A fatal mistake. He had split his forces and sent them chasing a shadow, leaving himself exposed. The door to his office slid open. Silas stood there, not as a ghost, but as an avenger. He was drenched from the rain, his eyes burning with a cold fire. He held his pistol in a low, steady grip. "Croft," Silas said. The name was not a question, but a judgment. Croft stared, his arrogance warring with his burgeoning terror. How did you get in here?" "My security." "Your security is gone," Silas stated simply. "It's just you and me now." From the hallway, the sounds of a brief, brutal struggle erupted and then fell silent. Iris appeared in the doorway behind Silas, her face bruised but her eyes blazing with defiance. At her side, Cerberus stood with his fur bristled, a low growl emanating from his chest, his gaze locked on Croft. The protector and the protected reunited. Croft's face contorted in a sneer of disbelief and rage. He raised his pistol, his hand shaking slightly. "You think you can just walk in here? I own this town. I own the police. I own everything." "You don't own him," Iris said, her voice filled with contempt. "You don't own his loyalty." Croft fired. A panicked, clumsy shot that went wide, shattering a ridiculously expensive vase. Before he could fire again, Silas was moving. He didn't dive for cover. He advanced. He closed the distance with terrifying speed, a blur of controlled aggression. He batted Croft's gun hand aside with one hand while the other delivered a single, devastating punch to the jaw. The sound of the impact was sickeningly loud. Croft stumbled back, his silver pistol clattering across the marble floor. He was a businessman, a creature of boardrooms and backroom deals. He was no match for a man who was violence personified. Silas didn't kill him. He didn't need to. He had already won. He stood over the cowering, whimpering executive, a figure of absolute authority. "My father left me a legacy," Silas said, his voice dangerously quiet. "He asked me to protect this sanctuary. You are not welcome here anymore." He picked up Croft's phone from the desk and hit a single button, a live stream. He then picked up the hard drive, which he'd brought with him, and held it up. To the entire world, he broadcasted the contents, the fraud, the corruption, the poisoning, the deaths, everything. Julian Croft's empire crumbled, not with a bang, but with the click of a button. The legacy was secure. The aftermath was a quiet storm. Federal agents in dark suits descended on Croft's estate, a place once a symbol of untouchable power, now a meticulously catalogued crime scene. Julian Croft, stripped of his arrogance and expensive suits, was led away in handcuffs, his face a mask of disbelief. He kept muttering that it was all a mistake, that he was the victim, a delusion that no one entertained. The media frenzy was intense, but Silas was already gone. He and Iris had slipped away before the first official vehicle arrived, melting back into the misty landscape that had become their battlefield and their sanctuary. They sat on the porch of his father's small, repaired house, watching the sun burn through the morning fog, turning the surface of the Sound to molten silver. Officer Miller was recovering in the hospital, and his canine partner, Zeus, was resting comfortably in one of Iris's clinic kennels, already on his way to a full recovery. The town was safe. The water was safe. The legacy was protected. Aris handed Silas a steaming mug of coffee. "What will you do now?" she asked, her voice soft. "Your leave is almost over." Silas looked out at the water, at the vast, peaceful expanse his father had fought so hard to protect. He thought of the deserts and the mountains, the endless cycle of violence and the fleeting, hollow victories. He had been a guardian of a nation, a protector of abstract ideals on foreign soil. But here, the fight was tangible. He could see the lives he had protected, breathe the air he had kept clean. "I think," he said slowly, the words feeling new and strange and right, "my war is here now." He wasn't just a SEAL anymore. He was his father's son. He was a guardian of this place. He had found the one thing he hadn't known he was searching for, a purpose that felt like peace, a home. Cerberus laid his head on Silas's knee, sighing contentedly. The loyal dog, the constant partner, was home too. Silas rested his hand on the dog's head, the silent bond between them stronger than any words. He had been forged in fire and dismissed by his family, a weapon searching for a war. But in this quiet corner of the world, protecting a legacy he never asked for, he had finally found his sanctuary. The protector was finally home. The story of true loyalty, of a guardian who stands against the storm, reminds us that the most important battles are often fought for the places and people we call home. We hope this story has inspired you. Please comment Amen below if you believe in the power of loyalty and protection. God bless you and your families, and may you always have a sanctuary to call your own.